Have you discovered the completely redesigned positively.com yet? When you create a free account at positively.com, you can enroll in fun, accessible, and free online courses to help you and your dog live your best lives together. Join the community completely dedicated to supercharging your relationship with your dog at positively.com today. That's positively.com. And now, on to the podcast. Before we start this podcast, I'd like to just put a disclaimer on it that the subject matter that we're going to be talking about is quite difficult and hard to listen to. So I just want to put that out there before we start, which is not the best introduction to you, Jim, but I think it's warranted because you are a dog bite investigation expert, a dog aggression expert, and a dog bite fatality expert. You and I have known each other for many years. You are a former police officer, police lieutenant, I think. You were a lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have just got your PhD in veterinary forensics. Ah, my goodness. But you are the guy that people look to when things have gone really badly wrong. And you and I met years ago. I think it was through a friend of ours, Claudine Wilkins, who is an attorney here in Georgia. But we did a lot of her seminars, but then we also worked together on Positively's dog bite prevention conferences, which have now morphed into the dog behavior conference, which where we don't tackle that subject matter with regards to fatalities anymore. So, and it's more broad. The dog behavior conference is just broad dog behavior stuff. But you and I haven't seen each other for a while, but we did do quite a bit of work together. And I think it's really important that people know more about the work that you do. Well, first of all, Jim, welcome to the podcast. I'm really glad that you're here.
Well, thanks, Victoria. I'm thrilled to be here. We haven't talked in way too long. In fact, I think perhaps the last time we spent any time together was standing in the rain, in the mud, in the middle of an investigation in North Georgia that wound up with a very good outcome. But I'm not sure we've actually physically crossed. I think we've talked a few times, but I don't think we've crossed physical paths since then, which is a terrible shame.
Yes. I think that was about 6 years ago, 7 years ago. I can't even believe that. But yes, it was a huge dog fighting bust. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But you are, I think, probably one of the world's foremost experts when it comes to dog bites, dog aggression, and fatalities from dog bites. But how did you get into this line of work?
Well, part of it's a result of having been a police officer for so long. I spent 23 years in that career and got into dog training towards the end of it and learning about behavior and all of the attendant things we dog trainers tend to get mired in. And then there was an attack in 2001 out in San Francisco. A woman by the name of Diane Whipple was killed by a pair of very large dogs. And that caught my eye in the old police sense. And it never really occurred to me that dogs killed human beings. I mean, that was just totally a foreign idea to me. And I wanted to know why. Well, I started reaching out to other people. There were a few people in this country and a few people internationally that had kind of reached the edges of the subject. But I wanted to know more, and most of those people are now friends. But using my police background and connections there, I was able to do something that nobody had ever done before, and that was get access into the crime scenes and access into the full police reports, and to actually lay hands on the dogs that had already killed somebody, to be able to start putting together a profile and idea of how these incidents happened. And as such, I've got over 700 attacks in my database where people have died over a period of years. That's not just last year. No, it's not that bad. And I recently was on scene for yet another one. So I've been on scene, actually called to the scenes on about 50 cases. And in the course of doing those, have been able to go through the scenes with the police officers, to work with the animal services officers, to not only collect physical evidence such as bite marks and DNA and blood evidence from the dogs, but to also put hands on and see how they tick. And that led through a long and winding road to getting my PhD and putting together information. And actually, in my PhD dissertation, which I have to get published, putting together classes of attacks based on the physical evidence combined with the behavioral evidence. And really, I'm the first person that was able to combine those two sets of information, because as far as I know, none of the researchers before me had ever had the opportunity to get on scene and wade in, much like we did on the big dogfighting bust, and actually be there in the scene and looking at the evidence and see where things fit and where things didn't fit.
Yeah. Now I have unfortunately assisted in many puppy mill busts, but this was the first dogfighting bust that I had assisted in. And you had called me and told me about this, and it was about an hour from where I lived. So I met you up there. And fortunately, a friend of mine who is a leading photographer, as well as, a leading photographer, was coming to visit me. And I said, you need to come up here too, because we need to get good evidence. But I arrived on scene and I could not believe what I saw. It was shocking.
It was a horrible scene. And I'll tell you that the video we got that day was instrumental in being able to document all of those dogs and conditions, and was instrumental in actually gaining the conviction of the person there. Because by walking through and having the access or the ability to video, and having someone else there to help me by doing so, we could film me going into the scene and then going from dog to dog to dog and document the physical conditions, the medical conditions, the keeping conditions, scarring, injuries, untreated injuries, all of that, to let people, the jury in this case, be able to see how those dogs were living day by day. And that was so important.
And let me set the scene. It is in the middle of rural Georgia. It is raining. Pouring. We drive down this road. I have no idea where I'm going to, but I just know the address that you've given me. I turn into this driveway, and there's this quite a large wooden built house. And behind that house, and there are all these investigation trucks and police, and then you, and they look at me like, what are you doing here? I'm like, well, I'm here to assist Jim Crosby and you know, to assess these dogs. And so we walk behind the house, and not only do I see dogs in little crates, these are the breeding dogs, and I see puppies in just makeshift wooden rabbit hutches. that are on, that are built up, but then going to the back of the property and just dog after dog after dog in their areas where they're chained to a stake in the ground, where they have their circles, their sort of not the agitation areas, but their circles of where their chain allows them to go to, which actually sort of forms a circle around where they are. And some of them might have an overturned blue barrel that they can go in for shelter, but there's no food, there's no water except for the rainwater that's coming down. Some dogs don't even have any shelter at all. But they are, and we're not just talking 1, 2, 3, 4. We're talking about, I don't know how many.
107 dogs.
7 dogs split between 2 properties. Yeah. 100. So I think on the property we were, I don't even know how many there were. I lost count, but you just go.
There were 50 something on that.
Okay.
And the other property, there was another, whatever the remains was, but we wound up with a total of 107 dogs.
Right. And so we spend the day, we go from dog to dog to dog, you putting your hands on them, assessing them, us videoing that assessment, us taking pictures. There is also another veterinarian there so that we document every single dog. Now, why did we have to be so meticulous?
Well, because we didn't catch the people fighting the dogs actively at that moment. So in making a dog fighting arrest, and also in documenting cruelty, which this was cruelty, we have to build an entire case. It's called the totality of circumstances, that when you put all the pieces together, the only puzzle picture that remains is dogfighting and animal cruelty. And so by documenting and gathering that evidence from each individual dog, and then remember, for the following 3 days, I went from shelter to shelter to shelter and again put my hands on all of those dogs, documenting their behaviors, apart from the scene and their conditions and so forth. By gathering all that together, we got the bad guy sentenced to 50 years in prison. That was the record until very recently, where also in Georgia, another person was sentenced to 475 years in prison. Now, I don't know the details on that case, but until then, our case up there in North Georgia was the longest prison sentence ever granted for dogfighting and animal cruelty.
That was because the evidence was gathered from every single dog, and evidence of, because it wasn't just male dogs that were staked, it was female dogs that were staked too. There were dogs that were obviously more of the bait dogs because they had potentially more injuries on them. And when you go on a scene like this, you can't actually believe what you're doing, right? You can't actually believe what you're doing. First of all, people always ask me, when we could talk about this case, people always ask me, like, did you go up to the dogs? Weren't you afraid of getting bitten? And while some of the dogs definitely were quite frightening to look at, when you actually got closer to them, many of them just wanted contact with you. They just wanted you to help. They're used to being handled, because if they're they're fighting dogs, it's not good for a fighting dog to aggress towards humans.
No, right? If a higher level fighting dog is at all aggressive towards humans, they wind up not being a higher level dog, because sadly, things up to and including the people just simply shooting them right there in the ring occurs. And, these dogs are selected, unfortunately, by human intervention for being extremely violent towards other dogs. But the dog fighters are cowards. They don't want a dog that's likely to hurt them, including even when they've locked onto each other or grasping each other very strongly. I'll put it that way because there's no such thing as a locking jaw. But when they've grabbed each other strongly and held on, and the humans go to pry them off, they don't tolerate any redirection or refocusing their violence towards one of the humans. So these guys, like so many dogs I've seen in fighting cases, they were pretty social to people. There were one or two that was a problem, including Charlie in the back, which there was a story about later. But
Charlie, yeah, Charlie was big. Charlie definitely was one of those dogs who was like, "Don't you come near me!" But actually, yeah. Anyway,
Charlie actually wound up being a very human, social dog, and one of the good outcomes is that last I heard, Charlie was living out his life dumb and happy in a family. So he had a good outcome.
Yeah.
But the as you said, the documentation and collection of that evidence is critical in order to be able to rule out, I'm just exercising my dogs, or I just show my dogs. Well, if you're showing dogs, why are you showing dogs with scars and dings on them? That's not what I'm used to as a dog show. It was getting that evidence and collecting it all and having the level of cooperation we had with the police. And I mean, there were animal services from like 5 different counties with us because due to one of the hurricanes, all the biggies were busy and there was no major organization to reach out to. So we all gathered up there in North Georgia, and all of the animal services and police departments came together, and we were able to put together that wonderful case.
It was amazing. And I remember coming to the court and watching you give evidence. And it was amazing. It really was. And then obviously the attorney, Jack Browning, who did such an incredible job. And of course, the guy, the dog fighter, was convicted. This case had far-reaching consequences as well, because it was not just the fighting there. You normally find with these dog fighters that they have lots of connections to other dog fighters, not just in this country, but in other countries as well. So it became a full-blown investigation. That's why it's really important that these things are investigated, because they're going to come up with all kinds of excuses, which of course is BS, but you have to be able to prove that in a court of law.
Absolutely. And this particular case, we wished we could have extended it more, but as far as the intelligence gathering, we were able to extend this particular net east to some very connected people in the Atlanta area, and as far west as Louisiana and Arkansas and Texas. They were connected to basically the northern branch of the dogfighting highways that go from East Coast to West Coast. South, it's usually I-10. Further north, they go through Atlanta, Birmingham, and down into Louisiana and Texas. So there were a lot of tendrils from this case that reached out in different directions into some surprising places and into groups of people that you wouldn't have thought were involved in something as vicious and needlessly violent as this kind of case.
It is shocking how far-reaching it is. Look, dogfighting is a felony in all 50 states in the United States of America, but it still goes on. It still goes on in rural areas and in urban areas, especially in rural areas where there's just, it's rural. There's not a lot of people going there. And so you find that a lot of these puppy mills and a lot of these dogfighting rings are located there, and there aren't people for miles and miles around, so you don't hear the barking. But actually, there is a reason why, because people did hear the barking. There were people that had an idea that this was going on, and this is why this guy was reported. So there was that case, and I feel very fortunate to have worked, just alongside you in a small way with that, but in a way that I think was really important. That now people might ask, what happened to these dogs? And as you said, many rescue groups came in and took these dogs. And please, if you're working in rescue and you're ever on a scene, please don't take a dog until it's been processed, because what happens on these scenes, as well as puppy mills, everyone gets kind of sort of like, put this in, they get excited and they want to come and help, and everything moves fast, but you can't move fast, because what you need is every single animal, they are evidence and they need to be processed. And so then you can take them. But anyway, they were taken to lots of different shelters and lots of different organizations. And as you said, you went to some of these shelters and you had some hands on these dogs doing kinds of assessments. But people might be asking, like, what happened to them? Did everybody wants a happy ending. And indeed, for some of the dogs like Charlie, there were happy endings. And some of the dogs that we looked at, we're like, yeah, I think these dogs will be okay with in homes, but others weren't so lucky.
No, not everybody there survived. Some dogs had to be put down because of medical issues,
yes,
where they had
horrific
untreated injuries that were causing them long-term pain and suffering, other injuries that couldn't be addressed. It was just simply not possible. Some of them had extreme temperament issues where they were probably not the successful dogs because they also had human-focused aggression issues that made them. It's like I tell people, there's not a home, just the right home for every single animal out there. We wish there were, and the numbers say, oh, people are looking for animals and blah, blah. But if you have a dog that has special needs, for instance, it's very human, social, wonderful, even good around kids, but cannot be desensitized to the presence of other animals. Okay, great, but it's real hard to find somebody who lives in the middle of Wyoming with no other dogs and no strangers and no cats to let that animal be able to safely live out its life. So there were some very hard decisions we had to make based on threats and danger to humans, and we were able to rehabilitate a lot of those dogs. But some of them, it just was not responsible or remotely safe to place those dogs.
And the dogs that were the successful, they were the survivors. The survivors, many survivors went on and lived and hopefully still live with families. But those families understood their dogs' special needs. And some of that meant it's a lifetime of helping a dog through trauma, that have experienced severe trauma.
And it's very much like people. I'm convinced the research isn't quite there yet, but I'm convinced from the many dogfight cases I've been involved in and cruelty cases that dogs can suffer PTSD like human beings. And that's one of the things we have to be careful with is the people who are taking those animals into their families need to understand that there may be triggers that the dogs simply can't help themselves with that could place themselves or others in danger. Very much like a human veteran of combat that is great 363 days of the year, but 4th of July and New Year's Eve, they go hide in the closet because the explosions of the fireworks throw them back into the middle of a horrible situation that nobody should ever have to be in.
I agree with you, Jim. And I know that the evidence out there or the research out there. There still needs to be more research, but I do feel with a lot of the dogs that I have been called in to work with that there's definitely something going on where that dog gets triggered by a certain memory from what happened to its life before. And that is terrible to see. But, you know, what I learned from this case was how prevalent still dog fighting is in this country, and also how hidden it still is. But also I learned about what happens when police departments, veterinarians, behaviorists, investigators, all of these people, lawyers, when everybody works together, how you can make something good out of something very bad and get justice for these dogs, justice for the people that were involved in this, that had to suffer as well, watching what happened to these dogs. I'm not talking about the dog fighters themselves. I'm saying for the people that were on scene, I have to say my heart and kudos goes out to them for the work they do, as it always does for the work that you do. I want to take a quick break, but after the break, I'd like to come back. And for those of you who are sensitive to hearing about cases where there are human fatalities, that is what we are going to be talking about next. So we'll be back after this message. Have you been trying to find the right time to level up your professional dog trainer skills, knowledge, and certification? We built the Victoria Stilwell Academy's professional dog trainer course for people like you, and we've purposely designed it so that you can start whenever is most convenient for you. Or are you looking for how to begin as a professional dog trainer and don't know where to start? The Dog Trainer course guides you through the learning process from A to Z, delivering a powerful yet flexible experience, resulting in VSA's prestigious Certified Dog Trainer certification. Or maybe you're already a trainer, but feel there are a few holes in your skills and knowledge. VSA's flagship course contains all of the knowledge and skill-based assessments via your own dedicated faculty advisor to mentor you through the course and help build your confidence to be an elite dog training professional. Or perhaps you already run a pet business as a dog walker, a sitter, daycare, groomer, or your veterinary staff, and you want to be able to provide the clients who already trust you with certified training and behavior services as well. No matter where you are on your journey, the Victoria Stilwell Academy's Dog Trainer course is here to help you chase your dreams as a professional dog trainer. Our friendly, accessible team is available today to talk with you and help you determine whether VSA is the right fit for you. Or you can enroll in a completely free starter course right now to test drive the VSA Student Learning Center for yourself. Just visit vsdta.com to get in touch, enroll in a free course, or apply now. That's vsdta.com. Again, go to vsdta.com to learn more now. I can't wait to see you in class. I'm back with Jim Crosby, dog bite investigation expert and dog bite fatality expert, dog aggression expert. Now, I've learned a lot from you, Jim, and I've learned a lot because I've also accompanied you on some of these cases. There was a case in South Georgia that I met you down out of a boy who'd been playing outside his home, his house, and he was found by, I think it was at night or something. Anyway, he was found and he was dead. And it was thought to be, nobody heard anything, but it was thought to be a dog attack. And I came down and I met you down there and we walked the scene. And then they had picked up, I think animal control or the police had picked up a couple of dogs who they thought might have been the dogs that had done this. And that's when I accompanied you to where the shelter was. And then we did dog teeth impressions, that kind of stuff. So bite impressions. And it was just it's a big learning experience for me to actually see your process. Now, in that case, that was a difficult case.
Yes, that was a challenging case. And that one didn't, well, none of those fatality cases have good endings because somebody has horribly lost their lives. In that particular case, the good news part, if there was going to be any, was that the 4 dogs that were suspected, we were able to, between comparing the dental impressions with the injuries on the child, and yes, I was there at the autopsy working with the medical examiner like I am on so many of these, getting the bite impressions, we were able to exclude all 4 of those dogs. And that exclusion was then backed up by DNA that we recovered from the child's body. The bad news is we never did find the animal that was actually responsible. But because of the advances we'd made up till then, which I've still been working on ever since, we were able to address exactly what happened and to not needlessly destroy 4 animals that just simply happened to be in the area. Before I started this, and I don't mean to sound like I'm humble bragging or something silly like that, but most police responses to fatalities by dogs or allegedly by dogs have been, there's a dog, there's a dead person, bang, we shoot the dog goes to the landfill, the person goes to the funeral home, and everybody goes home. That's been the center of my research, is putting together protocols and processes where we can do better investigations. And now I've had cases, including one not too far from you, where we know the case was actually a criminal homicide by a human that wound up then being covered up by trying to use dogs. And I've been on scene on several of those now. And looking back, heaven only knows how many cases of murder we missed because we weren't investigating properly. And I'm not picking on the police, having been an officer for so long. We didn't know. And for a long time, nobody had ever looked with the eyes of both a police officer and somebody who's highly trained in behavior to try to put to cross the streams, talking in Ghostbusters terms, to find out what was really going on. And now things have changed. Just a few weeks ago, I was down in Central Florida. An incident occurred. The medical examiner's office, I had been to literally only a month before, training them on how we're doing better investigations. They called me in the middle of the evening, and I jumped in my truck and headed down there and spent the next day with them. I was on the scene where it happened. I was sadly at the child's autopsy. I interacted with the dogs, and we did a much more thorough investigation, something that frankly wouldn't have happened 20 years ago. And the sheriff there has been very supportive, and we're going to do everything we can to hold the humans responsible for what their dogs did. And it was not the boy's family. These were dogs who belonged to others, and we're going to do our very best to hold them responsible, just like we have in multiple cases in Georgia and across the country, and even the cases I've been privileged to be involved in the UK and Australia.
Now, you do lecture around the world, and that's important because the more of you that are out there, the better. We just had a case here that where a 6-year-old was killed by the family dogs, Rottweilers, 7 of them that were emaciated, kept in cages and emaciated. It reminds me of the case you had in Alabama, where a man who was walking down to his mailbox was attacked by 2 Rottweilers. And that was, we won't go into the particulars of that case because it was particularly gruesome. But what reminded me of the case that's just happened here in Georgia is the fact that these dogs were so neglected and were kept in cages and they were starving.
And that was very much like the Alabama case, because yes, the 2 dogs had gotten loose and were basically in nutrition mode, if you will, looking for things to eat. But when the residence where the dogs was raided, we recovered 33 more Rottweilers that were being kept in undersized cages, and multiple dogs in 2 small kennels. Dogs that had not only behavioral problems, but had medical problems. The 2 primary dogs we could tell from evidence gathered that they had been scavenging for food. And there was a predatory component to the attack on the victim. But yeah, that's a very similar case where there were far too many animals that were not being taken care of. And, the consequences are not just that dogs suffer and starve, but they can become, due to survival drive, threats to human beings.
And that brings me to my next question. What drives dogs? What makes dogs kill people? Because we've domesticated these animals. We've domesticated them. We've hopefully bred them so that they are not aggressive towards us. That is an issue, obviously. But what makes a dog kill somebody?
Well, we have to back up slightly and think about a couple of things, Vic. And one of them is that behaviors that organisms, whether it's people, dogs, seagulls, worms, behaviors that we perform that succeed in fulfilling our needs tend to be reinforced and happen again. And with dogs, biting, regardless of the result, is a behavior that makes sense to the dog at that time, in that dog's experience, based on all of the circumstances and based how humans have interacted with and treated that dog in the past. All of those come together and result in dogs having to make the choice as to what tool to do to either meet their needs or survive. Sometimes dogs have issues with, and you and I both know it, with what's called bite inhibition. In other words, how hard they bite. There are dogs who have deficits in bite control, that once the biting sequence starts, they have difficulty stopping. That behavior continues until the neurochemicals start to abate. And that's part of the research that I'm doing with Harvard these days. But the fact is that people can die in different ways from contact with dogs. And it can be as minimal as one of my cases where the guy just simply got a nick on his finger. No big deal. Unfortunately, he happened to be immunocompromised. And that was a behavior that goes into one of my categories I've put together, because that's not a behavior that the dog would reasonably expect to produce a catastrophe. That particular dog was telling a stranger, hey, back up. I need a little space here. It was very controlled, very minor, but because of this person's immune system having been collapsed due to having their spleen removed from a car crash years before, they passed away from that. That's different from the recent case I had down in Central Florida where the wounds were absolutely catastrophic. And I'm not going to go into that. I was, again, at the autopsy with the medical examiner, and the level of injuries we documented were off the charts. But part of the question is to look and figure out why those dogs at that time found that behavior to make sense to them. And I believe we've got a really good idea wrapped around it. But to boil all of it down, the reason people get bitten or killed by dogs is because there has been a human that's failed somewhere along the way.
Yep.
Either the human has failed to recognize, and this is a big one, failed to recognize warning signs, indicators, those early warning signals that there's a problem, or they have encouraged behavior that is likely to result in a horrible, tragic ending to the situation. The failure to recognize that is, I mean, you've seen it in your practice too. How many people have come to you and you listen to them and you realize that the reason, and fortunately for you and I both, they're calling us finally, but they've gone for way too long and tried to hide their head in the sand and make believe that Fluffy is perfect. Well, Fluffy's got issues, and we can help Fluffy with that. We can help Fluffy recover from whatever problems there are. But, you know, people say, oh, the dog just went off and there was no way to tell. Yeah. Every once in a while, I have seen what are basically mentally ill animals. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, dogs have a healthy signaling system. They have the body language that you and I have both taught to people. They have lots of warning signs that typically show up before a catastrophe. And if people would just, that's one of the things, everybody listening to this, all of the trainers and so forth, if we can teach people how to recognize problems before they become so acute that someone gets hurt, then we can save a lot of people, a lot of heartache, and a lot of animals.
I think we should say that actually dog bite fatalities are rare. There's on average, it always seems to around 30.
Yeah, it's bumped up a little in the last few years, and no, I don't know why, but it's now averaging about 40 a year across the United States. Now, there's far more in other countries. In India, for instance, due to a lot of different things. For instance, there's about 50,000 people a year in India who die of rabies. And there are cases there, but that's an area where there's a billion plus people crammed together. Here in the U.S., it's about 40 a year, sometimes a little bit more, on good years a little bit less, but that's out of 350 million people. So I'd figured it out one time that your chance of being killed by a dog is about 1 in 15 million or so. So it's actually an unusual, which is why it's been so important. It's why it's so important that we get access to these cases. And for instance, that's what the the Canine Brain Project at Harvard University, where I'm now a researcher. That's why we're looking into brain structures and chemicals and why these things are happening, is to, if we can reduce it from 40 to 30 or 25, my God, that's 10 or 15 families a year that won't have to go through that kind of trauma.
And I think even though we say, well, actually it's rare, so yes, around 40 a year, that is still 40 families that have lost a family member. That is still, I mean, we don't even want one. And
No.
through my work with you, through my work with just dealing with aggression, I have met some of these families, met many of these families who've lost children, lost loved ones. And just to hear their story, it's horrific.
You and I have spoken to the family down in that used to live in the Fort Lauderdale area who lost their child. The couple who lost their son, Joey.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Liam. Joey was the dad.
Yep.
And
that was a Weimaraner.
Right. That was a Weimaraner. And that was one of those things where the bite should not have been fatal. But that was a very restrained, low-level bite that just happened to put a single tooth through the carotid artery and jugular vein on the child's neck by sheer happenstance.
Yeah.
And it was tragic. But, these cases, they are very rare. But again, whatever we can do to reduce them still makes a difference, because not only is it the victim and the victim's immediate family, but the victim's extended family, and even just simply more than absolutely minor dog bites has ripples into the community, where people may be reacting over the top to a perceived incident that might not be what they think it is. And it affects the dog owners and the non-dog owners in communities when one of these happens. There are very often unintended consequences that happen not only due to the incident, but due to the sometimes knee-jerk responses post-incident, where people are trying to look like they're doing something, but they don't really know what needs to be done. And that's where we can step in and help inform them.
Now, if somebody wanted to get in contact with you, there's been a dog bite in the area, there's been a dog attack, or they need somebody because you are an expert witness as well. Is that what we call you? Yes, an expert.
Yes.
So what would they do if they want to get in touch with you?
Well, the easy way is my email, which is very easy. It's the words canine aggression, just simply run together @gmail. So that's pretty easy. If you Google me, my contact information comes up very quickly. I really don't have a website out there, but usually the best thing to do is Google Jim Crosby dog, and the contacts come up. And the good news is that due to we have a little bit of funding through the university for me to be able to respond to these cases. If anybody out there has like 6 numbers with the lottery and nothing to do with their money, Harvard University will happily be the recipient of any grant monies to help support the Canine Brain Project. We're through the Department of Human Evolutionary Biology there at Harvard. It's, again, the email is canineaggression@gmail.com. Spell out the word canine, but that's the easiest way to find me.
And of course, you speak around the world.
Yes. Don't have anything coming up in the next little bit, but I've been to Australia. I've been to Singapore. I've been to the UK several times, which, by the way, the first time I went was with you
Mm-hmm.
and have enjoyed it ever since, to the point that my youngest daughter has just married a nice British gentleman. Um,
Wow. She's got
yeah,
taste
in
then.
fact, yes, she does. And actually, his parents this week are here in the States to spend some time with us. So,
How nice.
but yeah, I do seminars, and I'm also available, especially for animal services and police departments and medical examiners who want to know more and want to know how they can do better jobs and hold the right end of the leash responsible when these horrible things happen.
Now, the data that you are collecting is really important. And that's why, as many of these, not even fatalities, but also maulings and stuff and dog bites that people do call you up about, um, that the more data you have on this, the more you're going to be able to understand why dogs do what they do. And the more you'll be able to give out information, not just for investigating when after it happens, but to prevent things like this happening again.
Yes, absolutely. And I should have it. The project's been approved. We should be going live in the next month or so. We're going to be sending out surveys to animal control agencies across the country where they will have a secure login to share with us dog bite information from their jurisdictions. Everything from the number of bites to the number of serious bites, and there'll be criteria for them. So that should be coming up shortly. But gathering that information, dog bite information has not heretofore been gathered very well. It's usually reported to health departments, but one county's health department may not talk to the next county. One state definitely doesn't talk to the next state. There is no such thing as a national dangerous dog database or registry, which I strongly think we should have. And so trying to put this information together hopefully will let us start answering some questions with good, solid data, not just rumors, and be able to quantify what's happening.
And I know we haven't tackled this, but you are against breed-specific legislation, aren't you?
Yes, I'm for individual assessment of animals as individuals. The science does not support making breed-wise assumptions, or even worse, appearance-wide assumptions of what the behavior is going to be. There are places where banned breeds are identified by what they look like, and that just doesn't scientifically work. For instance, and I will bring it up, the UK.
Yep.
The difference between a banned XL bully and a non-banned dog is literally a difference between half an inch at the shoulders in their height. Now, if you've got a litter of puppies from the same parents and you've got 4 puppies and 3 of them wind up being 19 inches at the shoulders and one of them winds up being 21 inches at the shoulders, how can you say that that one dog who's genetically identical to the other 3 is somehow inherently vicious, whereas the other dogs are just fine and they can go down the road, pop it up? Ooh, that's silly.
It is, isn't it?
And it's not supported by any science.
I'm glad you said that. And I want to end on that because I think it's important for people to know that, look, we live with these animals in our homes and we love them and we care for them. But sometimes things go wrong. And if you are dealing with a behavior issue in your dog and I think it's really important. Well, it is really important to reach out to a certified professional positive dog trainer, not some trainer that's going to come and whack a shock collar on your dog or a prong collar and suppress your dog into non-behavior only to have the dog explode a bit further on down the road. But to get a certified positive trainer that can come along and help you, because yes, if you see signs, and we're not even talking about fatalities here, but seeing signs your dog is uncomfortable or your dog has maybe a bite history, it's really important to nip it in the bud as soon as possible and to get help. Jim, thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your expertise with me. I have followed your work for many years. I feel like I've been very lucky, I think is the wrong word to use, but also honored to be able to come with you on some of these incidences, to learn a lot from you. And especially, I think one of the crowning glories of this whole thing was to get a conviction on that dog fighter on the Polk County one that we did. So, I am very, very honored that I was able to even be a tiny bit of a help in getting that conviction.
Well, thanks, Vicki, and I do appreciate you having me on, and I do value the friendship we've had for all of these years and working together. And it's been way too long since we've had an opportunity to sit down and just catch up with each other. But I mean, I half expected to talk to you today and find out that your dear daughter was at retirement age suddenly.
Yeah, no, still at college, but yeah, the time goes by too fast.
Yes, but I remember her as a much younger person, and
crazy.
I appreciate all of the things that you and your certificates are doing out there to try to help and to just say that when there are serious problems, if we dig into them adequately, there's an awful lot of good we can do, because even a minor bite is our dogs talking to us. And what is it that Winnie the Pooh was attributed to saying once? There's a lot of people who talk to animals, but not enough who listen. And so everybody, if you can take one thing from this, listen to your animal. Listen to what they're telling you. You don't have to be magic. It's not whispering. They're talking normally to you. Listen.
Jim, thank you so much.
Sure thing. Thanks, Vic.
Everybody, fascinating. I know this is hard to listen to, but the work that Jim does is so very, very important. And I want to thank him very much for coming on this podcast and sharing it with us. Thank you guys for always listening to our podcasts. You followed us for years now. We really appreciate it. And Buzzsprout does too. We are in the top 5% of the most downloaded podcasts on Buzzsprout. So we're very proud of that. But it's because of guests like you. Thank you guys. And you have a great week, and love that dog that you have in your house with you and the dogs that you work with. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to Victoria Stilwell's Positively podcast. For Victoria's online dog training courses, more information, and helpful dog training tips, visit Victoria's official website at positively.com. Get connected on Facebook, Instagram, and other social media as Victoria Stilwell, and follow her on Twitter at Victoria S. Learn to become a professional dog trainer with the Victoria Stilwell Academy at vsdogtrainingacademy.com. And be sure to tune in next time as Victoria helps you and your dog live your best life together, positively.